history remembers him as one of the greatest composers who ever lived. The master behind music so beautiful, it feels almost divine. But what if I told you that the man who wrote some of the most uplifting music in human history lived a life filled with death, grief, loneliness, and heartbreak? Before the world called him a genius, Johann Sebastian Bach was an orphan, a widower, a prisoner, a father who buried child after child. And in the end, the man who gave music to the world died nearly blind and almost forgotten. This is the tragic life of Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach was born in 1685 in the small German town of Eisenach. Music surrounded him from the beginning. The Bach family was practically a musical dynasty. For generations, they had been organists, violinists, and composers. But childhood didn't last long. When Johann was only 9 years old, his mother died. And less than a year later, his father died too. Imagine that for a moment. A 10-year-old boy suddenly alone in the world. No parents, no stability, no childhood left. He moved in with his older brother, Johann Christoph, who became both guardian and teacher. But life there was strict. Some stories say young Bach became so desperate to study music that he secretly copied forbidden manuscripts late at night by moonlight. Not because he wanted fame, because music was the only thing he had left. As Bach grew older, his talent became impossible to ignore. He was brilliant, too brilliant. Church leaders and employers constantly complained that his music was too complicated, too emotional, too ambitious. Today, we worship Bach for his complexity. Back then, it got him into trouble. In Arnstadt, church officials criticized him endlessly. They accused him of confusing congregations with strange harmonies, of improvising too much, of being difficult. But Bach refused to make his music smaller just to make people comfortable, and that stubbornness would cost him dearly. In 1717, Bach accepted a better job in Cöthen. There was just one problem. His current employer refused to let him leave. So Bach demanded his release. The response? He was arrested, thrown in jail for nearly a month, for being too obstinate. Imagine imprisoning one of the greatest musical minds in history because he wanted artistic freedom. Then came the tragedy that may have broken Bach more than anything else. In 1720, Bach traveled with Prince Leopold on official business. When he returned home, his wife, Maria Barbara, was dead. No warning, no goodbye, no final words. She had already been buried before he came back. Just imagine walking through your front door, expecting to see the person you love most, only to discover they're gone forever. Historians believe this loss deeply changed Bach. And when you listen to some of the music he wrote afterward, you can almost hear the grief inside it. Not loud grief, quiet grief, the kind people carry silently for the rest of their lives. Bach remarried and continued composing at an unbelievable pace. But tragedy kept following him. He and his wives had 20 children. 20. But in the 18th century, death was everywhere. Disease, infection, infant mortality. One by one, Bach buried child after child. Some died as babies. Some never had the chance to truly live. Only about half of his children survived into adulthood. Think about that emotional weight. How many funerals can one person endure? And still, every week, Bach continued writing music that sounded like heaven itself. It's almost impossible to understand. How does someone carry that much pain and still create beauty? Late in life, Bach's health began to collapse. His eyesight faded. Eventually, he underwent eye surgery by a traveling surgeon named John Taylor. Ironically, Taylor was infamous for failed procedures. The surgery likely made Bach worse. Soon, the composer who spent his life reading and writing music could barely see at all. And then came one final cruelty. By the time Bach died in 1750, musical styles had changed. His work was considered old-fashioned, complicated, outdated. Yes, the man we now call one of the greatest composers in human history died largely forgotten. For decades after his death, much of his music disappeared into obscurity. Until nearly 80 years later, another composer, Felix Mendelssohn, rediscovered Bach's work and showed the world what it had missed. Only then did people finally realize the genius they had overlooked. What makes Bach's story so powerful is not just the tragedy. It's what he created despite it. Orphaned as a child, imprisoned as an adult, a husband shattered by loss, a father surrounded by death, a man who went blind before the end. And somehow, through all of it, he wrote music filled with order, hope, faith, and transcendent beauty. Maybe that's why Bach still moves people centuries later, because underneath every note is survival. Proof that even in a life filled with suffering, human beings can still create something eternal. And perhaps that's Bach's greatest masterpiece of all. Johann Sebastian Bach, 1685 to 1750.